So every year for the past 11 years, we've published this annual report called the State of Green Business Report. I want to spend just a few minutes talking about it and teeing up a lot of what we're going to be talking about over the next few days. For the past, I think it's 6 years, we've done that in partnership with TrueCost. Rich Madison and Libby Bernick are around somewhere. I see Rich here, and Libby, I'm sure you're somewhere. Great partners. And there's two parts to it. Every year we name 10 trends. I'll get to that in a minute. And TrueCost crunches hundreds of thousands of data points on close to a couple thousand companies, both the S&P 500 US companies and an index of 1,200 global companies, to look at the trailing 5-year results of a lot of different indices. And we mix it up a little bit. We add some new ones every year, maybe remove a couple. But they're basically looking at the energy, the inputs and outputs of natural capital, of what companies are taking out of the biosphere and putting back into it in terms of air, water, and soil emissions, and what the dollar value is of that as you start to put the value of what is a gallon of water extracted, or obviously a ton of CO2 emitted. So we're looking both forward in the trends and back a little bit in the index to see how we're doing. So I wanted to talk a little bit about both halves of it. This is an infographic from the report. By the way, it's a free download from GreenBiz if you haven't yet seen it. And just some highlights. We've got more companies that are setting carbon and water targets. We've got, although the current carbon targets just represent just 20% of the reductions needed by the top 1,200 companies to align with the 2-degree goal from Paris. Got more stock exchanges setting environmental listing requirements. There's now 68 of them in the world that have that, representing 40,000 companies. Not all of these are mandatory. Some are voluntary, some are mandatory. But that's a really interesting part of the scene in terms of stock exchanges around the world that are beginning to put some kind of environmental or ESG requirement. Greenhouse gas emissions fell a little bit. It's the beginning, but obviously nowhere near what we need to be doing. More companies are disclosing their Scope 3 emissions, which is obviously for most companies, where 70, 80, and even 90% of their emissions lie. And this is the part I always sort of find interesting. The natural capital costs, this is the amount of money that if companies had to pay the full cost of the resources that they extract and the emissions that they emit, exceeded $4 trillion for the first time. And that's 2x of income. So let me show you that specifically. If you look at these, the green bar is the global 1,200 and the blue bar is the S&P 500. And you can see that if companies had to pay the full cost of their impacts, it would more than wipe out their profits. In many cases, double what their profit is. And this is a theoretical exercise, to be sure, but this is really pointing out risk. This is about the risk that's built into companies' value chains, and a great way of measuring it. So the trends, the 10 of them, I'm certainly not going to talk about them all. What I love about the trends is that we've done, boast a little bit, a pretty good job of looking around the corner and talking about some of the things that a year, 2, certainly 3 years from now will become issues. We talked about the circular economy maybe 3 or 4 years ago, talked about food waste about 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, a number of other things that have now become very much part of so many of your jobs and lives in terms of the things that you need to be thinking about and looking at. And we've got 10 more, so we've now done over 11 years, 110 of these. And I have to say, we've hit more than we've missed. So, just a few. Actually, if you look at the ones on the left side, those are the ones that are much more related to the GreenBiz community. The ones on the right are more related to the Verge community. which is the sustainability and technology. But as I talked about before, the ESG evaluation and the recognition by the mainstream investment community is finally catching on. It's been a long time coming, but I think it's really starting to hit. We've seen the letter that Larry Fink sent last month. There's a letter going out by 9 large institutional investors, including Vanguard, to all your CEOs this month. There's just been so much energy and acquisitions with S&P buying TrueCost and Morningstar investing, I think, in Sustainalytics. This has finally become a mainstream marketplace. And outside the US, and particularly in Europe, this is, if that's a harbinger for what we're going to be seeing here in North America, we're just getting going here. The accounting community is catching on. There's a report that I think is coming out tomorrow from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and COSO, which is an acronym, I don't remember what it stands for, but it is the big, I think, accounting and risk firms, looking at enterprise risk management and ESG, and how those two fit together. And Brendan LeBlanc, who is somewhere out here, if you want to know anything about it, Brendan LeBlanc from EY will more than bend your ear. He might break it, actually, talking about this. As he's told me yesterday, he says, if you don't understand it, this is all you need to know. This is a very big deal, and frankly, what he's been working on for a long, long time. So I think we're just beginning to lay the foundation, the bricks, if you will, for I think, a much more robust engagement with sustainability, ESG in general, and the investment community. We're going to talk this event about science-based targets. There's some sessions on that. The green finance is, much like the ESG, is just fascinating and ramping up really fast in terms of how do we pay for this transition? How do we finance it? The 2-degree goal, the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. How do we pay for it? These are trillions and trillions of dollars, depending on who's doing the estimates. Are 5 to 8 or even more trillions of dollars a year investments between now and, let's say, 2030 to achieve these things. Where's that coming from? It's coming from both traditional and increasingly some non-traditional finance institutions and financial vehicles. So that's just happening. We've been talking about carbon. The next speaker, Bill McDonough, has talked in the past, has written some great stuff about how we think about carbon. It's not all carbon is bad, certainly not the carbon that we're made of, but there's fugitive carbon, which is the stuff we're trying to get rid of, and living carbon and durable carbon, and sort of rethinking how that works. I know there's going to be some sessions with Noah Deitch and Peter Bick and some others about what's going on in terms of how to rethink the carbon value chain. Economic inclusion, how do we make sure this just transition that we are beginning to understand and integrate into the sustainability function inside companies to make sure that it's not about just diversity and inclusion in your workforce, but diversity and inclusion in the communities where you operate, in the markets that you serve. And how do we have that conversation in a much more robust way? So that's what we're going to be talking about here. This report every year tees up this event, and I encourage you to check it out. But the state of green business continues to be strong and sound, and the trends continue to go in some promising directions. Obviously, a lot more work to do, but again, thank you for checking that out and being a part of the data that we collect for that every year.